Well, welcome, Harimai. We are so glad that you could join us in the Zoom service. We Unitarians have met in Auckland since the first Unitarian church opened in Auckland in 1898 for free-thinking people who disagree with some of the teachings of Orthodox Christianity. So says Te Ara, the Encyclopedia of New Zealand. Well, why are we doing this service? In November 2021, Clay delivered a service called Blah, Blah, Blah. He began by saying, Greta Thunberg has been teaching us how to speak truth to power. She has resisted being a token voice used by governments lacking political will and by global companies seeking to monetize efforts to stop killing the planet while doing their best to protect their financial interests in extracting carbon. Clay's particular musing prompted three of us from the Climate Action Team and the Peace and Social Justice Group to think about our individual responsibilities regarding the climate crisis. We acknowledge that our congregation is knowledgeable about and care very deeply about climate change, and that many of us, if not all, will have already begun to make positive changes to reduce our carbon emissions. We are aware that climate change is one of the big factors in today's mental health issues, along with COVID and the war in the Ukraine. Do contact Clay if you have any concerns and would like to talk. Our aim this morning is to remind ourselves of the issues and of the urgency for climate action, to provide information on climate issues and action happening now, to support and help with undertaking some of these changes, to acknowledge that some issues are non-negotiable. For example, domestic and overseas travel to visit family or business, the prohibitive cost of electric vehicles, and solar panels, for example. We also acknowledge the excellent online resources available on the CAT site, initiated by John Graves, and the valuable input by Joel. Thanks to both of you. Well, Brenda, Jonathan, and myself met and decided to explore what is being done in the wake of Clay's talk and the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in 2021, and what we as individuals could do to help mitigate in our own way some of the effects of the climate crisis. And we began by measuring our own environmental footprints. Our talk today outlines firstly the current report from the 18th of May 2022 Stockholm +50 Unlocking a Better Future that was summarized by Rod Oram early in June this year on Newsroom. Jonathan talks about what is being done by some of our large corporations in New Zealand to help mitigate the effects of the climate crisis. And Brenda talks about what we found as a result of exploring our own environmental footprints and to suggest some personal household changes that we might like to start to begin with. And how then we might go on to lock in these changes so that we're ready to move on to larger challenges. Our opening song will be familiar to many of you, Blue Boat Home. The opening words are by Maya Popper. She's an American Romanian poet and the author of Wound is the Origin of Wonder. This is what she says about her poem. I've been trying to work on poems about the environment that draw from and create tension with inherited narratives. I grew fascinated by Noah's wife, a woman unnamed in the Bible, and her role during the flood. I chose to write to her as a way to think about my own role and potential inaction in the current climate crisis. Letter to Noah's wife. You were never mentioned on Ararat or elsewhere, but I know a woman's hand in salvation when I see it. Lately, I'm torn between despair and ignorance. I'm not a vegetarian. Shop plastic, use an air conditioner. Is this what happens before it all goes fluvial? Do the selfish grow self-conscious by the withering begonias? Lately, I worry that every black dress will be worn to a funeral. New York, a bullion, eroded, filigree, anything but illness. I beg the plagues but shiny crows or nuclear rain. Not a drop in London, May through June. I bask in the wilt by a golden hour light. Lately, only lately, it is late. Tucking our families into the safeties of the past. My children, will they exist by the time it's irreversible? Will they live astonished at the thought of ice not pulled from the mouth of a machine? Which parent will be the one to break the myth? The Arctic wasn't Sisyphus's snowy hill. Noah's wife, I'm wringing my hands, not knowing how to know or move forward. Was it you who gathered flowers once the earth had dried? How did you explain the light to all the animals? Brenda will now light the chalice.
Thank you, Shirin. We light this chalice for the web of life which sustains us, for the sacred circle of life in which we have our being, for the earth, the sky, above and below, and for our Mother Earth, and for the mystery.
The next song is by Midnight Oil, Beds Are Burning. One of my favorite Aussie bands. The lead singer, Peter Garrett, he was born in 1953. He's an Australian musician, environmentalist, activist, and former politician. And in 1973, Garrett became the lead singer of Australian rock band Midnight Oil, which I hope will resonate with younger members of the congregation, but perhaps not so much younger ones. So here we are, Midnight Oil, Oil, Beds Are Burning. Well, to set the scene, I want to just read a summary of the major World Health initiatives since '72, when the UN first held the first ever environmental summit. This summary was written by Rod Oram, which was published on June the 3rd this year. The Stockholm Summary. In early June 1972, the United Nations gathered 113 countries in Stockholm for their first ever environmental summit. Sweden had pushed for the meeting because human-induced damage was escalating around the planet. To name just 3 causes, acid rain was killing trees, DDT was killing birds, and air pollution was killing people. In 1992, the UN established its Framework Convention on Climate Change and held the Rio Earth Summit, which brought together some of the environment and development for the first time in a United Nations all-nations summit. Negotiations under the Framework Convention gave us the Kyoto Protocol in 2005, our first attempt to reduce emissions. But it was a failure. So further Framework Convention labors led to the Paris Agreement, replacing it in 2015. But the rulebook for the Paris Pact was only agreed last year at the Glasgow climate negotiations. We can make good decisions. We have largely stopped causing acid rain or using DDT, to name 2. In 1972, when the first Stockholm summit was hosted, Earth Overshoot Day, the day by which we've used up a year's worth of sustainable resources, was December the 10th. Last year, it was July the 29th. In 2022, Earth Overshoot Day lands on July the 28th. Watch this space. But those dates are for all countries, with poor developing countries with low footprints heavily subsidizing wealthier developed ones. Last year in 2021, New Zealand's Overshoot Day was April the 19th. We Kiwis use 3.3 planets worth each year. Quite simply, the first Stockholm conference began our journey to sustainability. We've achieved some solutions, and we have developed a lot of local, national, and international structures and goals to drive more. But we continue to create a deep, dangerous, and widening chasm between the damage we inflict on Earth, our life support system, and the actions we take towards achieving true human sustainability in all meanings of the word: ecological, environmental, social, cultural, and economic. The Stockholm Environment Institute recently published a very insightful report reflecting on the legacy of the first conference in 1972 and the tasks ahead. And Rod Oram goes on to quote directly: "We live amid entwined crises, both planetary and human. Humans are causing an unprecedented change in our climate and our ecosystems, and those who contributed the least to the planetary crisis are suffering the worst impacts. We don't have a gap in policies and aspirations, rather in actions. Since 1972, only around 1/10 of the hundreds of global environment and sustainable development targets agreed by the countries have been achieved or seen significant progress. It's not enough. The knowledge and the means of solving our problems are known and knowable and available. Implementation is missing. We are better equipped for change than ever by harnessing momentum for change, the growing public support, faster uptake of clean technology, inclusive and innovative finance, and robust scientific evidence on positive co-benefits of acting now. 2022 can be a new watershed moment for the pursuit of our sustainable future on Earth. We have the keys to unlock a better future. Our synthesis of scientific research and new ideas points to 3 broad shifts that require immediate action now to redefine our relationship with nature, ensure prosperity that lasts for all, and to invest in a sustainable future. If these actions are initiated now, they can seed transformative change. Our relationship with nature needs redefining from one of extraction to one of care. Human nature connectedness should be strengthened in our social norms and in our value systems, and in how we live our everyday lives by integrating nature into our cities, protecting animal welfare, and shifting to more plant-based diets, increasing nature-based education for children and youth, and recognizing and drawing on Indigenous and local knowledge. It's only possible to ensure prosperity that lasts for all by completely rethinking our way of living. But the words of welcome by Sweden's Prime Minister Olof Palme to the 1972 delegates are just as forceful and encouraging for the 2022 delegates. I am certain that solutions can be found, but it's absolutely necessary that concerted international action is taken. It is indeed very, very urgent, At the same time, the feeling of urgency should not overshadow the fact that solutions will require far-reaching changes in attitudes and in social structures. Jonathan will now build on some of these ideas in his part of this talk. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Shirin. What I was going to talk about just in a few slides here is the climate change challenge and exactly actually why it's an issue. And then what New Zealand's climate footprint looks like, and what New Zealand corporations are doing to try to address the climate challenge. You know, Shirin just talked about the need to take action, and there is action being taken. Whether it's, you know, sufficient is a big question mark. So first, I'd like to share with you a slide on just how much the temperature change has gone up. And, you know, some folks just think this is part of normal weather patterns. But if we look at charts like this, I think it looks like a lot more than a normal weather pattern. And it looks, I mean, the 98% of climate scientists believe that this is driven by industrialization. So, and then a second slide. Now, I'm not sure whether I'm going to get this or not. Call this a 50% chance. You know, given the song that we just heard, "The World is Burning." This shows California actually has a very good data series since 1910 on the frequency of forest fires. There's no sound to this little 1 minute sort of data series, but if you look at the size of the forest, hopefully 50% chance we get this, but if you look at the size of the fires and the frequency over the last 110 years, you really sort of conclude that in fact the forest is burning. So first, I'm going to give you sort of a depressing description of climate change, because we skip over it sometimes, but I sort of want to give you the scientific research. I read a couple books on climate change each year, partly to understand the new sort of landscape, but also for helping my I'm an independent director for different companies, so it helps me understand what company risks might be. So the short-term effects that we're seeing right now are the higher temperatures. Europe has had 10 out of the last 20 in history, its highest temperatures in the last 20 years. So storms, wildfires, we just talked about in California, the warming ocean is starting to hit the Great Coral Reef, and migration. Crops are failing more often, which is why specifically African migration to Europe, Syria is even an example of why migration has picked up so much. The biggest issue about climate change are not actually sort of the storms. The biggest issue is food production. The reason that the scientists are especially worried about food production is that if the temperature goes up like sort of, well, 1.5 or 3 or 4 or 5 degrees, areas like New Zealand can actually grow more food that is more appropriate to tropical regions, you know, or further north of us. But it's unclear what the whole area around the equator does. And the problem with the area around the equator is that quite a few people live there. Like, so the area around the equator includes countries like Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil, India. So, you know, there's a couple billion people there. There's some areas of the world, Siberia, Russia, Canada, that could actually boost food production a bit. but sort of not enough to offset the drop, and it's not in the right place. Now, looking forward, again, sorry to be depressing, but scientists are actually reasonably certain at current temperatures that all the Arctic, Antarctic, Greenland ice is going to melt. The reason is that in the geological record, at the times the temperature were this hot, there was no ice. It'll take several centuries to do so, but that will result in more than a 50-meter rise in sea level. The big debate among scientists today is the rate of change on sea level. So 10 years ago, it was 1/4 of a meter by 2100. Now, because of feedback loops and warmer temperatures, it's about a meter in the next 80 years. The combination of flooding and sea level rise, though, makes certain areas very vulnerable just within the next 20 to 30 years. So specifically, Vietnam, Bangladesh, areas of China, because they're very coastal, very close, they will be vulnerable. Happily, New Zealand is better protected because we're volcanic with relatively few plains, but no, we too have rebuilt, like if you look at Auckland, we've rebuilt a lot of stuff near sea level. Most of our airports would say a 2-meter rise, as well as places like there's a big area around Dunedin that's just barely above sea level. So we would have our own, but there's many more people up in Vietnam, Bangladesh, Eastern China that would be affected. So I'm not going to continue depressing you all, but I did want to go through why they call climate change an existential threat. So often people don't really talk about why, and I thought it would be good to fill that out. So now, what are we going to do about it? First, description of what New Zealand greenhouse emissions look like. Our big challenge is it's mostly agriculture. It's mostly methane from cows. But there is manufacturing, services, and households, which is where we're going to focus first. But because agriculture is so big, we're in 5th place in the world. So we think of ourselves as a clean green image, but on greenhouse gas, not so much. Climate change solutions. We're committed as a government, and it's all the parties, I think, maybe besides ACT, but both Labor and National have committed to going to net zero by 2050. Our big initial focus is decarbonizing our electrical network and transport through the replacement of petrol vehicles with EVs. And that has an impact, both the electrical network going to pure renewables and then EVs and transport of 30 to 40% of our carbon footprint. So we hit actually most of the non-agricultural carbon footprint. As Shirin noted earlier, while EV technology already exists, the challenge is to make it affordable. The capital cost up front for EVs is much more than the average car that we have in New Zealand. On agriculture, we have things like seaweed that might decrease methane emissions by 20%. And the government's carefully, because of politics, moving to have the carbon price also reflected in agriculture, but this is our big challenge. I do want to mention, as Shirin noted, that companies are putting a great deal of work into this. And as an example of a company that I'm a director for, Air New Zealand, aviation contributes 2 to 4% of the worldwide carbon footprint. Without this change, quite apart from Air New Zealand wanting a better world, it's also a business reason that they're looking at this. We'll get a gradual decline of air travel. People will stop traveling if we can't offset carbon effectively. So Air New Zealand's strategy is to get a sustainable aviation fuel plant in this part of the world and start to use sustainable aviation fuel. It exists, but it's 3 times more expensive, and passengers aren't willing, the average passenger is not willing to pay that extra money. So we have to make it cheaper, but we have to start producing it, start putting it in our fuel, and then get it gradually cheaper. If we could put all aviation in fuel, that would drop our carbon emissions by 80%. Number 2, we think just like there's EVs for cars, for our smaller planes, like a Auckland to Tauranga route, we can do electric, and it's not that far away, 5 to 10 years. The big problem on the bigger planes is the batteries would be too heavy to fly. So trans-Pacific planes, we need hydrogen. Airbus is working with us sort of 10 to 15 years away for having a hydrogen long haul plane. So that's an example of how Air New Zealand is looking. Another company that I'm a director on, the biggest utility company in New Zealand, Vector, is actually looking at decarbonization as just a big plus for its business. The electrical network would need to get 40 to 50% bigger to supply all the EV demands, electrical demands. So that's actually a business opportunity for us. So, and then just finally, we can put this on the website, but as I mentioned, I try to read 1 to 2 books a year on climate change. And here are some very good books if you'd like to start to introduce yourself to the challenges. So with that, I think I switch over to Brenda, who's going to take our macro perspective that Shirin and I have introduced, and then start to go smaller and what the church do. Brenda, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think it was interesting, Jonathan, to hear that New Zealand household impact is 12% of New Zealand's total carbon footprint. And that sort of leads us to, we can do something even though it's a little bit. And cumulatively, it will help. And it also gets us on that same page of going on to do more.
Yeah, Brenda, could I just interrupt? That's what we use directly. But the footprint from the services and products we buy are much bigger than 12%. Okay, so just to clarify.
Thank you, because that makes it even more important on the changes that we decide to do.
Yeah. Okay,
so I'll just carry on and talk about exploring our environmental footprints after Jonathan and Shirin have shown us how urgent this action is, and that the time to start doing things is now. Now, I'm aware that many of you are familiar with carbon footprint calculators. However, Shirin, Jonathan, and I would like to gently remind ourselves and you of the impact that our actions have on the environment. Our carbon footprint is one way to measure that. And I'd also like us to think about ways we can avoid, reduce, and mitigate these actions so we can reduce our carbon emissions wherever possible. Why should we bother about this? Well, calculating our carbon footprint is a way to better understand our impact on the environment. When we know the impact, the amount of carbon each of our activities generates, we're then better placed to do something about it. So it's the knowledge first, and then we can act. We can make targeted decisions on identified actions to reduce our emissions. The need for action is now, and any actions taken to reduce, avoid, or mitigate our carbon emissions will make a difference. I'm reminded again of Edmund Burke's saying, "No one could make a greater mistake than he or she who did nothing because he or she could only do a little." Now, what carbon footprint calculators are available? There's a number of companies offering free online carbon footprint calculators for households and individuals. When looking at the calculators available, it quickly became apparent New Zealand-based carbon footprint calculator gave a more meaningful result. This is because they use New Zealand source data from the Ministry for the Environment and other government agencies. The ease of use and the reliability of the outcome was investigated with each. 3 New Zealand-based carbon footprint calculators, Genless with their Future Fit, Toy2 EnviroCare, and ECOS gave similar results when tested. All 3 used the Ministry for the Environment data in developing the calculators. All 3 measured household energy, vehicle mileage, travel and waste. Genless and ECOS also measured diet. Help with making changes to reduce carbon emissions is given with all 3. Now, who are these 3 organisations? Well, Genless is a government organisation that focuses on the many aspects of climate action and is considered to give the best guidance for climate action for individuals. Future Fit is the name of their carbon footprint calculator, and that's amongst the suite of tools that Genless has. Genless also provide car emission figures based on vehicle models. Now, Paul has put links to these tools in the chat box, and they will also be available in the Sunday talk page on our church website. Toy2 EnviroCare provides carbon assessment and certifications for businesses and organisations using science-based tools, actions, and evidence. A free online tool for calculating household carbon footprints is also provided. While this calculator does not include household diet, it is a very easy one to use, and a printable summary is available, which is helpful in keeping track of data input for the resulting carbon emissions. I'd like to acknowledge here the help that Toy2 EnviroCare have given me. Their responses to the many questions I have asked has helped shape this talk. Third company, ECOS, is an organisation with a charitable trust arm that provides help to businesses in reducing carbon emissions and provides help with development of a carbon reduction plan. ECOS has direct links to Indigenous and sustainable forests in New Zealand, where offset carbon credits can be purchased. ECOS also provides a carbon footprint calculator for schools and events, which could be useful. Links to Toy2 EnviroCare and ECOS calculators have been shown in the chat box and will be on our website. What can we do now? Okay, we can have a go and start calculating our carbon footprints. We suggest that we calculate our carbon footprint with a New Zealand-based calculator. We'll need to have our yearly energy bills and vehicle mileage, which is available on our warrant of fitness. We can record our input data and resulting carbon emissions for each category. We can identify an area or category that we feel we can make a change by avoiding, reducing, or mitigating our emissions. We can monitor our carbon footprints every 6 to 12 months to see the impact of these changes, lock in that change, and move forward onto the next challenge. Help the environment, one step at a time. Now, the question of non-negotiables and carbon offsets. We all have things we use or do that we feel are non-negotiable. This could be for health, family, or financial reasons. Maybe we can find some way to reduce, mitigate, or offset those non-negotiables. Alternatively, perhaps we can focus on other areas that we can make a change and make a difference, and have a targeted approach. From information I've read and webinars I've listened to, it appears that considering offsetting our carbon emissions should be our last resort. This is for our household emissions, only used when avoidance, reduction, or mitigation of the carbon emitting action cannot practically be done. There can be situations where making a carbon offset is appropriate, however. Both Toitū EnviroCare and ECOS provide the ability to offset our carbon emissions and to give the current price for carbon credits in New Zealand dollars in their calculator summaries. With ECOS, use of credits purchased can go towards helping Indigenous and sustainable forests in New Zealand, as I mentioned earlier. But one of the options Toitū EnviroCare offers is to use your carbon credits to purchase low emission cook stoves in India through Fair Trade India. Okay, both Shirin and Jonathan have talked about our challenges. So our challenges that we can look at is, first of all, can we commit to calculating or reviewing our household carbon footprint? And please note, these results are private and there's no pressure to disclose them to others. Secondly, can we commit to choosing one action that we can undertake now? For example, we might eat a large plant-based diet with healthy portions and no waste. We can buy no more than 3 new items of clothing per year. That's one I've committed to. We can keep electrical products for at least 7 years. We'll commit to reducing the number of short-haul and long-haul flights we take over the next 3 years, if that's practicable. We can hold on to our existing vehicles for longer if we're not in a position to purchase an EV or hybrid, or we could get rid of that vehicle altogether. We can make at least one life change shift to nudge the system, like moving to green energy, better insulating our home, or changing our KiwiSaver provider. And that's something Joel has talked about previously. We can also move our personal investments to an ESG fund, where businesses and companies are measured by the sustainability and ethical impact of their company's investments. ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance, are the 3 key factors used as the criteria to screen investment funds. We can commit for 6 to 12 months and see what a difference it makes to our carbon emissions. Another thing that we can commit to is, with elections coming up, we can go to political meetings and question candidates on their position on climate change. We can vote for a candidate who's the candidate who is most passionate about climate change, and we can advocate for all of government response to climate change. And Jonathan's touched on that too. What can we do as a church community? Using the momentum we hope this talk has generated, we might consider getting together in, say, 6 months' time to see how we're doing with our challenges. What has worked? Are there stumbling blocks? What are they, and how can we remove or get around them? And what more can we do? We can go on climate-related protest marches with our UU banner. We can advocate for meaningful change. And we might also decide to look at the carbon emitted by our church building or church activities. The 2022 guideline from the Ministry of the Environment can help with this. And again, the link is in the chat box on the website. Thanks so much for listening. I hope this has helped generate some excitement and feeling that we can make a difference. I think it's now on to you, Shirin, for our closing song. Thank you.
Well, the closing song, it's a few years old, but we all like the song very much. It's said, "Let the children have the last word," we decided. And this was written for the G7 conference that was held in Cornwall in England a few years ago. It's called G7, and it's written by Sir Tom Rice and Peter Hobbs. And these are the choristers at the Truro Cathedral. Brenda will now extinguish the chalice.
We extinguish this flame, but lock the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Over to you, Jonathan, for the closing words.
Great. Four Element Blessing by Eric Williams. May the firmness of the earth be yours. May the flow of the water be yours. May the freedom of the air be yours. May the fierceness of the fire be yours. May all of the gifts of this life, the below and the above, be with you now and remain with you always.
Thank you, Jonathan.
The questions that we thought would be good for discussion. The first is, what can we do now, or what can we commit now to impact to help with climate change? That's the first question, if we can have a think about that. And the second is, what can we do as a community, and in particular our church community, to make more meaningful change? Thank you.